Ultimately, assessment can be kind of simplified to kind of two concepts. Children are learning, and there's a teacher, and they're in a classroom perhaps or a learning environment. But to do assessment, you just need to gather information and then you share it. You gather and you share it. The gathering and the sharing, you might call that summative assessment. Um, the key here is that you don't need tests in order to gather the information about the children's learning, and you don't need grades on the report card to share it with the parents or with the community or with whoever it is you are sharing this information with. Um, so in fact, there's a lot of evidence to show that assessment can be done in a much better way if you do neither tests or grades. Remember that tests and grades are not the most effective means of assessment or of reporting or gathering and sharing information about children's learning. They just happen to be the most convenient ways of doing it. That's an important distinction. With how I do it, how I gather and share, even though I have abolished grading from my classroom, I still work in public education, and there still are expectations on me, like I still have to have a grade on the report card 3 times a year when I was teaching in the middle school. And I still was able to fulfill that professional responsibility. And I did that by placing a mark on the report card. But the question I inevitably will get is that if I don't have a grade book and I don't have any grades for any of the kids, then how do I provide a grade on the report card come report card time? And this is a very interesting question because when I first abolished grades, I had to figure out the answer to this question. And I had to end up emailing Alfie Cohn, and I had to ask him for some advice. And I remember I hold his advice very close to this day, and that is he suggested bring the kids in on it. Yes, I still have to have a grade on the report card, but who said that I had to have a list of grades in order to come up with a final grade? While it's true that this is the way we've always done things, it doesn't mean that's the way we always have to continue doing it. I'm not a mathematician, but something sounds fishy about this, that I would have a list of averages and I would average them together, and then I would come up with a final average from the report card. Anybody who knows anything about a little bit about mathematics would know that when you start averaging averages, I'm not sure what we have anymore. We might think we know what an 83 is, but really how is it any different than an 84? These grades are sort of masquerading as these objective assessments when they're really not. They're still wholly and entirely subjective. So I have three steps that I use in order to collect and share and then get a mark on the report card without having any marks anyways. Step one, and these don't have to go in order either, but one of the things I do is that I am a professional. I have a teacher degree, and I get to know these kids. I teach quite often. I teach them for 10 months of the year. So I have the professional autonomy and responsibility to be the primary assessment caregivers of my students. In this case, it just so happens that I'm not going to do it unilaterally, though. I'm going to collaborate with my students in a way for us to come up with a grade that I'm happy with because I think it's accurate, and they're happy with because they think that it somehow reflects their learning. The second thing I do is that I take very seriously the idea of portfolio assessments. And that is that a collection of the students' learning. And keep in mind here that this is not just the good stuff. This isn't just a place for the kids to put the things that they thought that they did very well. It includes the stuff that they had some miserable failures on. Because in my classroom, in our classroom, failures and mistakes are not things to run away from. They're not things to hide and sweep under the carpet. Instead, they are something to show other people, to share with them, not out of guilt, or shame, but out of a sense of pride. Like, here's what I had to go through in order to come up with uh, my current understanding for the way things operate. And you can't get there unless unless you wear some of your failures and mistakes with some pride. And so the portfolios often don't look very fancy at all. They're in this very raggedy, by the end of the year, kind of a raggedy manila folder that's stored in the classroom. The other form of portfolio assessment that I use is an online version. The online stuff, like the blogging and the discussion forums, do not replace the paper copies of the students' work. They only support, or they just add on to. They're a supplement of what the kids are doing on paper. What I like about the electronic stuff is that the legacy sticks around. Nobody's dog can eat the stuff they put online. So sometimes the online stuff can be a safer place. But again, it is a supplement, not a replacement. The last thing that I end up using to formulate a grade on the report card, even though I don't have any grades, is that I bring the kids in on it, and I ask them for them to reflect on, why do you think you should get that grade that you've selected? And I make a point of not being too nitpicky here. If I had in mind that I thought that they were going to get a 67 and they said 68, I'm not going to choose that hill to die on. Instead, when kids come up with a grade, I often ask them for a range, because a range would be more accurate anyways. To say that 67 is somehow more accurate than 68 would be just as silly as saying that 67.54 is more accurate than 68.83. How are we coming up with these? If rounding off to the nearest decimal point seems silly, then it hardly makes much more sense to say that 63 is better than 67. We don't know what these necessarily mean. The only grades I really know the difference of is 49 and 50. It's the difference between a pass and a fail. 79 and 80 is a difference between honors. And beyond that, I don't really know the difference between some of these grades. So I try not to be very picky. And I also try to reduce my teacher power. I really want the kids to come in and try to substantiate what they think they should get with real proof. So they'll refer to their portfolio and say, well, I think I should get this because, well, if you look at what I've done, look at my essay from September and compare it to my essay in June. Look at my sentence structure. It's incredibly different. So I've outlined three tools I use in order to come up with a final grade without having any grades. But sometimes there's a misperception here that I need to clear up. Some people will say, oh, I see, each one of the things I just identified is worth 33.3% of the final grade. And that's missing what I'm doing here. There is no averaging. And one of the best ways I can describe what I'm really talking about here is that assessment is not a spreadsheet. It's a conversation. It's a conversation that needs to happen between teacher and student. And it needs to be an authentic conversation where the student and the teacher can speak to each other honestly, without fear of reprisal, without fear of not getting the carrot or getting the stick. I want assessment to be a very honest conversation between the teacher and the kid. I guess I'll summarize it up this way. Art Costa once said that we must remember that the reason we assess children is so that one day they can grow up and they can assess themselves when we're no longer there to help them out with it. We want the goal of education to be a sense of some autonomy. And in order to do that, we have to bring the kids in on the assessment. And so even though I don't, if it was up to me, I would abolish grading altogether. And I would simply share with parents the students' learning. After all, the best way for parents to know if their children are learning is for them to see their children learning. A report card doesn't do that. A report card reports on learning as this third-hand document. And then interpretations have to be made based on the symbols that are placed on the report card. Instead, again, assessment is not a spreadsheet, it's a conversation, and it's a conversation that happens between the learner and the teacher in a way that the student can take some legitimate ownership over their own learning.